Most people said, well, you cry, baby, here is a lollipop for you. Oh, you feel bitter, let me buy you some ice cream. That's what we were told, that food is comforting. And so majority of our food stopped being nutritious. It's not important anymore. It's very important that it is comforting. So we now eat for comfort, not for nutrition. And it's way more important because our life is so stressful. And if you go in the supermarket and see how much nutritious food and how much comforting, most of it is comforting. I would say 90% is comforting and only 10% is nutritious. And of course chocolate is not nutritious, not at all. It's very comforting. And cake is not nutritious, it's comforting. And popcorn is not nutritious, it's comforting. And so lots of food is comforting, very comforting. The more comforting, the less nutritious. And so the best way to handle the stress is to go for a walk. And then the second thing you could do, you could just drink some water. Because whenever we go for a walk, our muscles produce some positive hormones, including some endorphins. And then we feel better. These endorphins counteract the negative emotion, negative hormones that when we have negative emotions, stress. So then we begin to feel better. And everybody knows that. You all experience that. When you're walking, you always feel better. Even if you don't like to walk, even if you're physically not fit, after walk you always feel better, feel emotionally better. And finally, chemical, biological, mental, and then spiritual addiction to cooked food. Because we are all spiritual beings. You are all spiritual beings. Every single one of you is not just a robot who is mechanically moving. You have this something in you that is the most important thing, spiritual being. And as a spiritual being, we have spiritual tasks. But we also live in material world. And when we live in material and in spiritual at the same time, material world is very demanding. We have created very demanding material world. Is there anybody who doesn't have to make a living here? Is there anybody who doesn't make any payments? Is there anybody who doesn't pay car insurance? Is there anybody who doesn't have to do certain things every single day, whether you want it or not? So, because we have to, we push the spiritual thing aside. Well, it could wait. It could wait. I have to pay my debts. That could wait. Well, it's waiting there already for 30 or 40 years. And because of that, we have developed spiritual pain. That's the way of spiritual self letting know that it's waiting. It's still waiting. We develop spiritual pain. That spiritual pain is not like physical pain, but it's much worse. It makes people commit suicide. It makes people feel depressed and take antidepressants. And that makes us feel so unhappy and so bored and so empty and feel such a grief. Because it's very, very important. And so that grief is so unbearable that we would like to have a break. We're searching for some pleasures. When we follow our spiritual mission, we don't look for pleasures because our life is just plain happiness. But when we don't, when our life is really shallow, then we're looking for pleasures. Are we looking for pleasures? What are pleasures? And what is the difference between pleasure and happiness? When you buy on yourself a new dress, is it a pleasure or happiness? Some people think it's happiness, but it's actually pleasure. And when you buy yourself a new expensive car, is it a pleasure or happiness? And in Russia, they all believe it's happiness. What do you think? What is it? It's just a pleasure. When you eat in good food, delicious food, what is that? Happiness? Pleasure. So what is happiness? Happiness is when you are fulfilling your spiritual self, when you're connected to your inner being. That's happiness, and that's the feeling. It doesn't go anywhere away. Actually, happiness fills you with energy, and it gives you, and it doesn't take any hormones from your body. It doesn't waste anything. When pleasures, whenever you experience pleasure, is wasting your hormones. Is draining your system. And in order to eat, you need to drain some hormones. In order to experience high, you need to drain some hormones. And people who use pleasures all the time, like, you know, some people have so much money, they could buy any pleasures. They become very depressed because they drain their positive hormones. They lack hormones. So pleasures are really harmful. No wonder all masters were staying away from pleasures. They were trying to live the life with little pleasures so they will be closer to happiness. That's two things. Some people think that they could substitute happiness with more pleasures. They think the more pleasures they have, the closer they to happiness, but actually they're further and further away. So the most accessible, the most available, the most inexpensive pleasure is cooked food. And it does knock you down for a few minutes. For 49 cents you buy a bag of chips at any convenience store. And you eat them and your brain becomes foggy for a couple minutes and you're having a break from your spiritual pain. And we want it to last. So we go again and again and again. We eat enough so it lasts for several hours. And that's the hardest level of addiction to cooked food, the spiritual level. Okay, and that's why we will dedicate 4 last steps to the spiritual addiction to cooked food. I found out that, in fact, I read about this in a big book of alcoholics, Alcoholics Anonymous, that if people don't find a spiritual mission, if they get rid of one addiction, another addiction will instantly come in. They'll begin to do something else because they cannot live with the whole, spiritual hole in their heart and without addiction. Addiction helps them to cope. Addiction to cooked food, I believe, is the hardest of all addictions. Several people already, professionals, specialists, psychologists, told me that cooked food, Cook Food Anonymous, 12 Steps to Raw Food is their program of the 21st century, because they say when people go raw 100%, they simultaneously quit smoking, drinking, drugs, and any other abuse of the body, because that is the hardest. That kind of includes all the rest of addictions in it. How many of you know that when you go raw you cannot smoke? How many of you heard that? Nobody knew. You know that you cannot smoke. You just cannot. You're unable to smoke. And you cannot drink alcohol. You just stop. It doesn't work. How many of you noticed that? Thank you. Thank you. See? That's how my husband quit drinking. We came from Russia. He was drinking wine. I had to hide it in the house. I know. But he just, after 6 months being raw, he says, well, I forgot about drinking. I said, what do you mean you forgot? I thought you just do it on purpose. You just decided to be healthy. He said, no, I forgot. I didn't even think about it. And then it was so weird to celebrate New Year's Eve and not even have a champagne. When my mother, who had already cancer, I called her and she says, I'm drinking champagne in your health. Like, it's in Russia. It's impossible not to drink champagne for the New Year's Eve. And we didn't really care. It was the first time in our life. Okay? My friend says, I'm quitting to smoke. I said, are you quitting to eat cooked food? He said, no. I said, do you know that if you quit eating cooked food, you'll quit smoke automatically? He said, I do know that. I said, so why don't? He said, but it's harder to quit eating cooked food than to quit smoking. So I'll just do one at a time. Okay. Well, this is a very radical idea that cooked food is addictive. To me it is so obvious, and to so many people it is so obvious. To everybody who tried to stay 100% raw, it is obvious that cooked food is addictive. But to majority of the world it is very radical idea. And I don't blame you if you feel resistance inside, and I'll try to work with that. Can I ask you my 3 questions? Some people didn't hear my 3 questions. Have you ever overeaten in your life? Yes. Did you like how you feel? No. Can you promise me right now you'll never do it again? No. What does it tell you? That there's something you would like to, but you cannot promise. So who makes decision for you what to eat?